The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
I felt like for a long time there was a solution here because everybody has worked on it, including the parties involved, but it only gets resolved for a short period of time, and then it festers again. And so it certainly appears like there's not a good solution that would keep this group together. Those are some pretty big comments from Jim Rutherford of the Vancouver Canucks that have once again brought us to another episode of All My Canucks. When you hear those comments from the interview with Gary Mason of the Globe and Mail from earlier this week, what does that make you think, CJ?
Well, I mean, I guess there's some surprise or shock to hear, the team president say those kind of things publicly. There's no surprise or shock to anyone who's been paying attention to this story, anyone who's been listening to our podcast, anyone who's anywhere in the NHL universe has by now understood that there is, a difficult situation with Pettersson and Miller. These guys have been on our trade boards. They've been on the tips of our tongues. And so, the more I've thought about it is, yes, I'm surprised that Jim Rutherford would say it, but at a certain point, like, why even pretend, right? Why even hide what's going on? I can't profess to know, what compelled Jim Rutherford to be that public about it, but I don't think it changes a damn thing, if I'm being honest. I don't think it makes the situation any more awkward it just kind of is what it is at this point. I mean, we've been talking about this since before Christmas time. It's almost February. And so, I don't think it changes their leverage in trade talks. Really, maybe honestly, Jim Rutherford felt at this point, you kind of owe it to your fans. You owe it to your paying customers just to fess up, quit letting this discussion be led by people who are hearing part of the truth or know bits of the story, which of course were included in that group. But yeah, I mean, it's never boring in Vancouver. They just won 2 games in a row when he gave that interview, though they've added a third win in Nashville on Wednesday night. So it hasn't impacted in the short term anyways, the team's performance either.
As we're talking, the Vancouver Canucks are in a playoff spot. So that 3-game winning streak for them, I mean, it's kind of funny that we're still talking about the story and now they're actually winning some games and they're still very much in the hunt to make the postseason. But just to see those comments out there, you say it might not change anything. I mean, at some point, something may still have to give with those 2 players, right?
Well, I mean, that's what he's saying. Right? He's saying it's irreplaceable. He's inferring strongly, if he didn't say it outright, that this is irreparably broken. That this basically, obviously, they were planning on having a core for many years built around Pettersson and Miller. Those guys each signed long-term extensions. They were key parts of the team that last year won the Pacific Division and got to Game 7 of the second round against Edmonton. I mean, there was every reason to believe they, along with Quinn Hughes, they were hoping, of course, Thatcher Demko would be part of that, and he might still be, but injuries have kind of slowed him down here in the last year or so. That was going to be kind of the shell or the core of a team that could contend for a long time. And basically Jim Rutherford's saying, oops, that's not the case, that this is, that everybody's done a lot of work on it, that things go well for a short period of time and then they get inflamed again. And, he did a subsequent interview, did Jim Rutherford with Ian McIntyre of Sportsnet, in which he basically said sometimes when something goes on so long, it just kind of breaks and people are less willing to put the effort in to try to address those issues because they've sort of been down that road before. And so you're right. It does still lead us to the conclusion that, there's going to be at least one trade. I don't think, I should say this, and I don't mean by necessarily March 7th, the trade deadline, but would not surprise me in the least if both of these players were traded in time. That might be the conclusion here because, I want to stress my side of this from what I've can report on. I think there's equal blame to be shared between Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. I know that this has been portrayed a certain way and certain media members have, kind of painted one as the villain and one as the victim. My understanding of this is, look, we're talking about 2 adults, 2 players that are paid very, very well to perform for their team, to do what's best for the Vancouver Canucks organization, which has afforded them those contracts, and they haven't been able to make it work. This is unprecedented. What isn't unprecedented is players not maybe getting along, but that it's this public and that it, so recently after the team had reached highs of success, that this is broken down to this degree. And so I think this is something they're both going to wear for a long time. I think it's something ultimately they may come to regret depending on what happens next in their careers and with that organization. And so I still think that there's a world they both end up getting moved, although there's no way to predict that. I think the organization, put it this way, is certainly open-minded to that potential outcome in time.
Fascinated at that last line there. I'm just fascinated at the fact that, you know what, you're right. This story has been portrayed more as Miller on Pettersson, and the way that you're describing it, there's both a fault. I'm very intrigued at the other side and how split this really is. Well,
I mean, look, it's one thing to have different personalities. Like, that exists everywhere. Obviously, these players each have the talents to be among the best players on any given team, not just the Vancouver Canucks. But Elias Pettersson has to own his part of this. I mean, he has to be willing to work through it. He has to communicate and find a way to work through it from his end. He has to understand that just because he's very different than JT Miller doesn't mean that JT Miller's bad or wrong. I mean, clearly the one thing I think anyone that knows JT Miller will say is he is driven to win. He's a very competitive guy. He demands a lot of himself. He demands a lot of the people around him. I mean, those are all characteristics we associate with some of the best leaders that have ever played in this sport. This isn't a normal workplace. This isn't about just, it's a very uncomfortable environment for everyone. I mean, you're pushed every single night. You've got to compete. And so I think Pettersson also has to look in the mirror. And look, the organization has said this. I mean, Patrick Allvin did an interview, I think it was with Ian McIntyre as well, around, the Christmas period, around the New Year's, where he said, we want Elias Pettersson to mature. I mean, that's kind of saying it without saying it. That's saying that he's got to grow up and learn how to deal with conflict and things not going his way, and maybe not everybody thinking the sun shines out of his butt. I mean, this is the reality. And we're not talking about a rookie player in the league. So, I think both bear responsibility. Obviously, I think the organization and the front office bear responsibility for maybe letting it get to this point, for not finding other solutions, or maybe not making a trade almost preemptively before this had spilled out into the public. And, part of what Jim Rutherford said in the Gary Mason interview is, basically we're not going to make a really bad trade. So the crazy part of all of this is he's for the first time saying publicly as well that, yes, this is untenable long-term, but short-term, 5 weeks in a couple of days to the deadline, we might not be trading these guys by March 7th. We might just have to muscle through this season. And yeah, if we go in the last week, sure, they've won 3 games in a row, but what does that look like on the other side of the trade deadline if there is no move?
Man, I've had it in my head that if this team keeps both players beyond the deadline, that is just going to be some chaos option. If they win games, maybe it won't be, but just because
winning papers it over, man. Like, I feel like
absolutely it does.
I feel like last year that was what happened in Vancouver. They got a new head coach in Rick Tocchet. They had a great season, sort of a charm season. They had a season, some of the, and I say this affectionately, the hockey nerds might have been pointing out, hey, unsustainable shooting percentage, and like a lot of things went right and all these things. And that's not to say that obviously they were a really good team. But they just had a year last year where everything went well, and man, they had 2 chances to eliminate the Oilers. I mean, they were a goal or 2 away from the Western Conference Final, and then you can start playing that game. Who knows? I mean, the playoffs can basically be decided on a knife's edge in this sport. And then this year, obviously, it's just everything's gone wrong right from the start, and now we're looking at a world where Rick Tocchet, with an out in his contract, might be walking away as the head coach. Obviously, a lot of frustration in the front office to even get to the point where Jim Rutherford's making those comments. Can't imagine ownership's happy. Can't imagine the players directly involved in this are happy. How does Quinn Hughes feel? Quinn Hughes is having a Hart Trophy-like season. And he's watching this all fall apart. And, I know he's the captain, and I'm sort of saying, hey, responsibilities to be shared here. I don't know how much it's up to him to make these guys decide to get along, but this is, it's a real Like, it's a shame. It's just hard to see a world where the Canucks, at least in the short term, emerge from this competitive. Now, over time, maybe one trade or two trades involving these players, and then they get some things back and they make other moves. And I'm not saying that they're going into a full scale rebuild here, because they don't want that. They want to keep Quinn Hughes, right? They understand what they have in last year's Norris Trophy winner. And so it's a pretty compelling theater. You just start to feel like the trade gets a little less likely. I know we're sort of a week post Rantanen deal now, and with Carolina being pretty involved with the Canucks on those talks, you just wonder how many more teams are going to step up and get serious. Plus, just the fact that this is out there. I mean, these are great players. I do think there's certainly other teams that look individually at JT Miller and Elias Pettersson and say, like, hey, if we give them a different environment, the talent is still there. There's a lot of reason to still like these guys. I mean, quite often when you see a star player traded, it's because something isn't working, right? You're not trading for them when everything's going amazing, because there's no world where the team thinks about that. So, I'm not saying they're untradeable, but I just don't know what kind of return the Canucks can expect at this point in time. And while I think the Canucks know they're going to lose a trade involving either of these guys, they're trying to not have it be a 7-1 loss. They want it to be a 3-2 loss in overtime.
For sure. I'm also just scared at the reality when you say that there's a possibility that a trade out of all of this could result in them not being competitive. And you mentioned Rick Tocchet's situation, and you wonder what Quinn Hughes might be thinking. All on my timeline, I see rumors about Brock Besser's future. Like, if this results in and I get what we're getting at here is very hypothetical, but if this results into the end of the Vancouver Canucks as we know them, that's a damn shame. It's a damn shame. That's a really good hockey club over there with so many talented players. And if this rift has this crazy ripple effect where you're looking at the roster, you're thinking, hey, maybe we got to start over again. That would be really tough to take for those fans. For sure.
But look, it was early March last year. Elias Pettersson signed monster extension, $11.6 million over 8 years. He has 45 points in 63 games since then.
Not good enough.
I mean, not good enough. That is a mile away from being a mile away good enough. And if you look at the Canucks' performance, and I just looked this up this week, did a little research here, Julian.
I can tell.
Connor Garland has more points in that window for the Canucks. He's got 52. JT Miller has 55 points in 58 games. Quinn Hughes has 78 points in that stretch. He's got, in basically the same number of games, 33 more points than Elias Pettersson does. I mean, this is where I'm saying there's obviously lots of different sides of the story, lots of layers. It's not an issue of right and wrong, black and white. Like, it's not that simple. But I still think ultimately Elias Pettersson got a monster paycheck and has not performed up to anywhere near where he's got to be. And, I didn't even include, by the way, his playoff numbers in that, which he sandwiched that around a really disappointing playoff campaign. Even though the Canucks did get to Game 7 of the second round. So it's the Canucks have been leaking oil for a long time. It's only now becoming so apparent to everybody publicly that this has to change. And I guess the cherry on top was that those couple interviews Jim Rutherford gave. So, the best I can give you is stay tuned. I don't have any new insight on, I don't get the sense trade talks have heated up here in the last week or anything like that. But obviously those discussions continue, and I think the Canucks, if they can make a deal that makes any sense, would love to make at least one deal before March 7th.
I'm keeping my phone. I keep my phone by my side all the time. So, preparing myself in the event of another late Friday night deal. I wasn't by my phone last Friday, and Mikko Rantanen gets traded. So I've learned from that.
Oh man. That's too bad for you. Because it was, I will say, it's pretty fun when that stuff's going down. And everything's
I usually love being in that. Right.
Moment. Everything's being pieced together. And it's pretty good. I remember when that trade was first breaking last week. And then at one point, Pierre LeBrun, our colleague, tweets the Chicago gets a 3rd round pick. And I was laughing because it was, at that point, it was known that Rantanen was involved. I'm pretty sure Chicago's 3rd round pick isn't the, but I mean, look at he was right, and B, he was just reporting what he's hearing. But yeah, it's fun being in the mix when that all happens. I don't know that we'll get another one on that scale again, but I will say it's a weird season. I've discussed obviously recently here about, the things, sort of the shifting plates with, a salary cap that's really going to jump, a new CBA, some pretty prominent players around the league who still need contracts. It's also a season in the league where, like, who's really good? I think it feels certainly more wide open than normal, especially in the Eastern Conference. But I'd even say, out West, I'll throw Dallas out there, right? I mean, right. Dallas is a team that's been to back-to-back conference finals. I'm guessing they were I don't remember, but I'm sure they were a popular cup pick before the season for people.
They're my cup pick.
There you go. And but like, I feel like they haven't ever quite hit their level for a sustained period of time yet this year. They lose Miro Heiskanen.
Yeah, that was a tough injury
in Vegas this week. They lost Tyler Seguin, which for them does mean that they have a lot of cap space to make moves. Like, I'm certainly not saying they're a bad team. They're a good team, but they've not been a great team this season on the ice yet. There's still probably time though. Like, if you're in their front office or you're in their dressing room, you're thinking, okay, we maybe make a move or two of significance, get hot in March, get into the playoffs and try your luck. I mean, and I'm sure on the East, there's lots of teams thinking that way. Obviously, Carolina's acting in that manner too. So anyway, it's a way of pointing out that this feels even more wide open than normal. Which I think could lead to more interesting trades because you've got more teams thinking, I think, big than just, the top three at the top of each conference.
I want to ask one more Elias Pettersson question, if I can. Did you see the not Trade Watch, but yeah, it was actually called Trade Watch. 10 potential destinations of what the Canucks should get back for Elias Pettersson. Harman Dayal and Shayna Goldman, friends of the show, put that up earlier this week. They put down 10 teams where it would make sense for Elias Pettersson to go.
I didn't read their story, but I got to say 10 teams is a stretch. Like, how?
Oh, for sure.
It's just hard to find 10 teams that could even think about the cap hit. It's not.
Or at least who should be interested. I think it's more just you're casting a bit of a wide net. Carolina is not in that list of 10 teams. I can imagine maybe after the Rantanen deal, they might be
short on assets that they're willing to trade.
Exactly. Should I go through? Is it okay if I go through the 10 teams? Can you tell me?
Sure, because I'll be reacting in real time because I didn't unfortunately get a chance to read that yet.
Okay, Buffalo, Nashville.
Buffalo makes the most sense.
Buffalo makes the most sense. So I haven't even gone through the other 9 teams. Buffalo makes the most sense.
Yes, because they're an organization that clearly has incentive to shake it up. They have lots of intriguing younger-ish pieces on their roster that, I think you can see how the teams could get to something that, would work. And they have cap space. They have a city, and I say this with all respect, I love Buffalo, but they're not a hot destination in free agency. You know what I mean? Like, they're a team where trading for this kind of player who's signed and locked up long-term, like, that's probably seen as a positive. It's a lot of money though for Pettersson. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's as simple as making a deal. Plus, we do know the teams have engaged to some degree on talks, not just recently, but going back before the holiday break. So I think Buffalo, if you had the handicap, it makes the most sense right now.
Okay. Stop me if I mention a city that makes more sense than Buffalo. Nashville, Utah.
Maybe. Not necessarily more sense.
But okay, maybe. I'm okay with that.
Maybe. More than Nashville to me, but yeah.
Chicago. Anaheim.
Yeah. Like, those are 2 teams, obviously, that are on the climb, right? Like, so what does Chicago and Anaheim, they don't lack prospects. Both teams have been drafted at the top of the draft for a while now. What they lacked is impact NHL players. Elias Pettersson at his best can be that. Although, based on that stat I read previously, I think there's got to be some sticker shock, some warning, some worry. 45 points in 63 games since you get your big ticket.
Man, I don't like that either.
We're talking does he have a 106-point season, I think, on his resume? He's got a 100-plus point season. I think it was a 106.
Yeah, but
my point is that's a long fall.
There's a part of me that's still confident he can get back up there, though. Like,
Connor Garland has outscored him. And I'm not hating on Connor Garland. I'm saying Pettersson can't be the 4th highest scorer on his team making that kind of money.
He can't, but we've clearly established throughout this whole thing that, like, this Vancouver team, I mean, look, they won last year, so I guess that's not enough of an excuse, but clearly the situation is not so great now. that has to play a role in this decline, right?
Yeah, but I mean, at some point, it's on the individual. Like if you just wait for all the days until you feel good, you're not going to get anything done. Like you have to fight through things. You have to adversity. I hate adversity as a catch-all term because it's used so much in sports, and I don't even sometimes know what it means. But I mean, the truth is anyone that's achieved greatness, they're doing it against a lot of things that are working against them, right? Like we celebrate athletes like Ovechkin and Crosby and players that do it for a long time. Patrick Mahomes, if you're in the NFL, because it's not like everything does go their way. Like they have to fight through some shit to do it. And they consistently find a way year in, year out, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter who's on their team, no matter how many back-to-backs they have, or like no one's here for excuses, right? I think Elias Pettersson is paid like someone who should have no excuses. Like that's not to say life is easy for him at all. I'm actually saying the opposite. It's hard because when you make that money and when you have that spotlight on you, nobody is going to feel bad for you. No one is going to say, yeah, but I mean, the truth is you're paid to perform, and he has performed in the past over a pretty long track record. That's why he got the contract. But literally since he signed the contract, his production has been in the tank, and that rests with him. I mean, it's a team game. You know, points can be a fickle thing to measure by. Obviously, there's stretches of good luck and stretches of bad luck that happen in our sport. But I mean, we're approaching 80 games since he, signed that contract, and he's producing like a second liner, maybe even a third liner. There's no way, like he has to, if he's the one who gets moved, I mean, he's really got to look himself in the mirror and figure out what's going on there.
Miller at a much lesser cap hit, very comparable point totals this year between both players. I mean, you make a really good point with Pettersson's point total since that contract extension, since that contract signing, though. Like it's like I said before, it's not good enough. It's not good enough.
Yeah, I don't think we can make excuses for him. I can recognize and be sympathetic and empathetic on a human level that it's been challenging.
I think that still plays some kind of role, maybe for everybody involved in all of this.
But this is why we're talking about him getting traded.
You're right.
Because he's meant to be a leader on the team. He's meant to lead them literally in a manner off the ice, but also on the ice. And he's fallen well short of what was expected of him so far. Now, the flip side is he's not even a year into that deal. There's a lot of runway left to just change the narrative here. And lots of players do have down seasons and all this stuff. So I'm not writing him off, but I do think any of these teams we're talking about has to try to account for this, has to try to get their own understanding of what's going on, and has to decide ultimately, do they want to take a risk on that guy? Because you trade for someone with that much money, you got to be damn sure that he's not bringing his, 60-point pace to your team that you want his 100-point pace.
26-year-old center who's had 100 points before, over 100 points, 3 30-goal seasons. I know this year's not great.
And the end of last year.
And the end.
Sorry,
fine,
I just don't want to. I want to make sure. Right. I want to be clear. We're not letting him off the hook because it's too long now. This isn't like, hey, he's playing. Like he might be playing a bit injured too. Like there is. I don't know if you've seen all the talk out of Vancouver, but like if you look at those NHL Edge data that shows like how speed bursts and power of shot that the NHL keeps, his skating is way off where it's been in the past, and so maybe there's an injury or something to explain that as well. But
for sure, and maybe look, that could be a cause for concern too. If you let him get that time to recover from whatever's going on, you make that move. I just don't think you galaxy brain it, man. I think if you're in a position where you can get a player at that stage of their career that, yes, they're having the down year, but they've had those highs before, and you believe that they can get back to those highs, man, I don't think you have to galaxy brain it too hard. I don't think you have to have that much hesitation in certain cases, right? If you have the assets to do it, like Buffalo, I think they should just be all in on that. What else do they have to lose? They need to have something work out for that damn franchise after all the rebuilding they've done. You got to do something. So I don't know if I'm a GM and I'm looking at Elias Pettersson right now, I'm leaning towards a yes, in spite of what's been going on with him, because I believe that he can change that and turn around.
Right.
It's not every day you see a player with at the age and the talent that he has that's just available. And you have him locked up for the next how many years?
The only reason he's available is because he's flat out stunk.
Yes, that's true. Just
honestly,
you're right.
like,
but
well, I'm just like, that's
no,
the
but
truth.
you're right. But you're absolutely right. I'm not. I can't argue with you on that. It's just I know if I'm a GM out there, I would love the opportunity to have.
If you're a GM, though, you got to go to your owner and be like, okay, so we owe this guy $78 million in actual cash. We got to, like, you just have to be sure. That's all I'm saying. You got to be sure.
If I'm working for an organization that wants to win, my owner's not thinking. My owner definitely is looking at that 78 million. Is like, man, that's 78 million. But he's also
78 million. If you make a mistake, that gets your ass fired. If you're a GM.
78 million. If that doesn't make, if that's not
if you
a mistake,
make a $5 million mistake, you might get fired. But 78 million, you're run out of town with a pitchfork.
And if that turns out to be the thing that gets me to a Stanley Cup, me and the owner are going to be enjoying all the old fashions and whatever drinks we want in the summer. That's the risk you run being a GM and trying to make those moves. Look at Vegas when they made that Jack Eichel trade with the neck and everything, right? Like I see this as a very comparable situation here. There are a lot of people who are probably looking at that being like, I don't know if you make that trade for Jack Eichel, and look at Jack Eichel now. I think this is a very...
Now our discussion is, how does Vegas pay Jack Eichel when his contract's up? Anyway, we'll leave that for another show.
That's very that's very fair. Very fair. Love this conversation. Okay. Mikko Rantanen fallout. I'm sure you read the article Peter Baugh wrote up on him. You had the opportunity to chat with him. The big quote going around, which I believe he also said something similar to a Finnish news outlet. I was ready to take a significant discount from my market value. We had some chats a couple days before, and then they traded me. That's what happened. That's why I didn't expect it. He did not comment on how much exactly the Avalanche offered, so it's unclear. I'm just reading off the article now. So it's unclear what his side viewed as market value or what it would have deemed a significant amount. What did you think of Mikko Rantanen's comments post-trade?
Well, he's emotional, right? He didn't. He wasn't forcing his way out of town. I think he believed ultimately that there would be a decision, where he would sign there. That's, I think, what Nathan McKinnon said as well to reporters. So I get that he's still just kind of experiencing all the waves of this. I don't know that it really matters. He would have taken a discount, and that's not a shot at him. The Avalanche looked at this, and they have Nathan McKinnon at $12.6 million. They know that they're going to have to pay Cale Makar more than that just because of the rising tide of what's going on around the league. And I'm not sure that they wanted a world where they had, say, 3 players making north of $12 million. That they felt that was a way to be, and into their 30s. I mean, Makar is younger, but, McKinnon's getting there, and Rantanen's 28 right now. So you would have some players getting older. And look, these guys are all guys they all profile as like being top players well into their 30s, but there's certainly some organizational risk to pay that many guys that kind of money and still try to win the Stanley Cup every year. So, I think if anything, Rantanen based on how productive he's been, based on his comparables, based on how much he will get paid, they just decided they couldn't do it. I don't think it was necessarily about saying the players being unreasonable or his agents being unreasonable. I think it's more that it didn't work. And not to make this about the Leafs, because I know we do that enough in corners of the hockey world. But, to me, that's always been the discussion I come back to when we talk about why the Leafs haven't got over the hump. There's lots of things you can point to from each year, blah, 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 blah. But the one constant has been they have had more money tied up in 3 players or more money tied up in 4 players, if you want to now include William Nylander, than any other team does in its top 3 or 4 players by a wide margin. And, we're now getting to where the cap is going to, maybe make this not the case, but they've had at times, 50% or more tied up in 4 players. And then, they'd fall short in the playoffs. And it's like, yeah, well, they don't have enough money to spend on other areas of the roster to build the right team. I realize I'm simplifying things, but I want to make the comparison because I think there is danger in a hard cap league. There's some debate about like hockey, right? Like it's obviously a team sport. I think one individual player has less impact unquestionably than say an individually great basketball player, as an example. Right. Individual basketball players just play more percentage of the game for starters. A hockey player plays 20 minutes of a 60-minute game. A defenseman can play 25, but there's still more than half the time, excluding goaltenders, where your skaters aren't on the ice, even the best players in the world. So you need a team. Obviously, certain players though are worth a lot more. I think Rantanen was in that case, or in that class of player, and is in that class. And so, anyway, my sort of takeaway from that is I believe him. I'll take him at his word. I've got no reason to believe that he wouldn't ultimately have taken a below market deal because he loved Denver so much. He loved his teammates. He loved his lifestyle. I think the organization looked at it ultimately and they concluded we can't win by paying everybody what they're worth here.
Like, if Mikko Rantanen said, all right, I'll take $12 million, would that have been enough? I know we'll never know. I know I brought up something similar earlier this week, but like 12 million versus 12.6, like really, is that much of a, anyway, I'm almost going to wonder about that.
His agent is the same agent that represented Leon Draisaitl. He has very favorable numbers to Leon Draisaitl. We know was seeking something like 14. Now, of course, negotiations have phases. Like you always ask for more than you think you're going to get, and the team comes in lower, and there's a back and forth. I don't know what the magic numbers would have been. I don't truly know, even after those comments, where exactly Rantanen's true number, like his floor was. And the Avalanche, to be honest, probably don't exactly know, right? I mean, part of negotiations is, it's one thing for Mikko to say this after the fact. He didn't go to the negotiating table and be like, well, I'm asking for 14, but the truth is I'd really take 12.5. So, part of the way a negotiation goes is you don't show all your cards. So I think it's hard to say what the number could be. I can't imagine he was going to take less than 12 though. I'm just thinking of recent comparables. Like William Nylander signed about a year ago now. His contract ticked in this year. He's 11.5. If you look at Rantanen's production, it's well above Nylander. So like, that's just a very recent comparable. Like I don't see him going to 11.5. So I would think 12 would be the absolute minimum. And to be honest, with a rising cap and where I think the top player salaries are going to go, like he should probably get paid more than Nathan McKinnon. I just think the Avalanche, it's not even, of course, in their negotiations, you try to say organizationally we have a cap. Lots of teams have done that with success, to be fair and to be clear. But I think ultimately they couldn't pay him what he wanted. I mean, that's how you get to that day. Must have been a heartbreaking decision, even internally, because you just know you're trying to make the best of like what's a bit of an untenable situation. And still early days. We'll see how everything shakes out. But, as I mentioned on our show Monday, to me, this frees Mikko Rantanen up in a lot of ways. Like once he does process everything, he can really make a decision that's best for him. He won't have any conflicting feelings, right? He's saying he would take less than market value in Colorado. Well, there's no reason to take less than market value anywhere now. I mean, now that cord has been cut. So whether it's in Carolina or whether he tests the market on July 1st, I think there's no discounts out there now when it comes to what his next contract's going to be. For sure.
You mentioned the Leafs. I didn't have it in my notes, but I have a Leafs question now. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the talk surrounding Chris Tanev as a possibility to replace Alex Pietrangelo at the upcoming Four Nations face-off?
I think it would be a safe choice. It's important for everyone to understand what Hockey Canada is looking to do with that position is bring in a player that does some of what Alex Pietrangelo would have done, which is in part be used for, defensive matchups, be very strong in that area of the game and penalty killing. And so when you look at what Chris Tanev does well, he does those things well. Now, that's not to say he's better than every defenseman of choice, but, a polar opposite type of player would be Evan Bouchard, who I understand as a right shot. A lot of people are saying maybe he should be on the team. And I'm not sitting here arguing that Chris Tanev is better than Evan Bouchard, that even a Stanley Cup contender would rather have one over the other. I mean, like there's trade-offs, right, in what each player can bring. But I do think Tanev can fill that role for Team Canada. McKenzie Weegar is probably Drew Doughty, McKenzie Weegar, Chris Tanev. I think it's likely one of those three that gets the call. The benefit of Weegar is he can play both sides. He could, he's got a big shot. He could fill on a power play. I don't think you need a power play guy. Team Canada has Cale Makar. So And we're talking 4 games at this tournament. Like, I think you can play the snot out of Cale Makar. I think he can take 2 minutes on most power plays. Now, you might want, what happens if he's injured, this or that. You might want some backup there. There's a strong case for Weegar. And I think ultimately, as I was sort of alluding to on Monday, I think that Team Canada wanted Drew Doughty all along. Now, he just played his first game of the season on Wednesday night. Was not eased back in, by the way, 24 minutes for the Kings. They were chasing that game. But I don't know where he's going to be at. I mean, Team Canada really has about a week or a little bit more to finalize this decision. I think they're going to give some time to Doughty to let him play 3 or 4 games or whatever the Kings schedule is in that time to at least see where he's at. But to me, Tanev makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you look at Canadians who shoot right, because that the handedness has always been important to Hockey Canada too. They generally like playing players on their strong side, and Pietrangelo is a right shot who's gone down injured. Canadians who shoot right, who are effective penalty killers, Chris Tanev is right at the top of the list if you look in terms of minutes played in the players in the NHL this year. So, he fills that role. And we should also mention, by the way, you only dress 6 defensemen per game. And so we're probably talking about a player who might be scratched the whole tournament, like potentially. Now, obviously, management can't think that way. They're thinking underperformance, injury, lots of things can happen. But so you want to be comfortable playing whoever you bring. But it's funny because this debate rages on my Twitter feed, and yet we really are talking about a player that's likely going to be scratched at least for game 1 against Sweden, no matter who it ends up getting named. But I don't think you can go wrong among the available names if it's one of Weegar, Doughty, or Tanev. And it would be quite a story, to be honest. Chris Tanev's 35. He did play at one World Hockey Championship for Canada, but he's not a player with an extensive Hockey Canada resume. I can't say 10 years ago, even though he was an established player in the league then, that he was up for discussion on Team Canada. But you have to remember, like last year, Dallas, he was part of the Dallas team that went to the conference final. What did he do in round 1? Jack Eichel was his assignment. Jack Eichel didn't get a lot done in that series. Up against Colorado in round 2, some high-powered stars there. He was an effective shutdown guy in those against top players in the world. Jim Nill was his GM in Dallas. Jim is part of Canada's brain trust. Obviously, I think Chris Tanev's one of those guys that for a lot of years was under the radar, and then in the last few years, just the appreciation for him has grown. Like, I think his his game probably hasn't changed one bit. What's changed is everybody's come around on it, and I think it's just far more accepted. As much as I realize, and I understand, like, people get tired of hearing about Leafs players and there can be I don't think this is actually a Leafs thing. Like, I think by last year, Julian, like you were there in Calgary when he was being traded, like how many teams wanted him? Oh yeah. Like, I feel like he's been getting this recognition, this level of recognition before he got to Toronto too. So I don't think that this is just like a Leafs media driven thing. And certainly I do know, he's truly on the radar. He's a legit, he's one of the couple choices here because of what he does. If it had been Makar that went down with an injury, they would be looking at more offensive minded D, right? It's the same if they lose a forward. Like, there's a range of forwards Team Canada can look at. It would depend which forward goes down injured, I think, based on who. That's why they didn't have one D on standby, one forward on standby. They wanted to be able to make very specific lineup related and situation related choices. And Tanev happens to profile, I think, as someone who would be a pretty safe bet for them, high character guy that can, excel in the defensive end of the ice.
I love the Chris Tanev story for all of the attributes you've mentioned. Having seen him in Calgary, like, incredible defensive defenseman. We also need to show some love to his durability as well. For a player who plays the style that he plays, he should be getting more injured and maybe more unavailable. He still finds a way to play full seasons, or at least close to full seasons whenever he can, which I think is the most surprising thing about his game, especially at his age. At the same time, for a best on best tournament, even if you are looking for someone who can be that guy for you at the defensive end of the ice, I guess in my head, I'm just thinking, well, there are so many guys out there who can play that two-way style, who can give you both, that the fact that Tanev's name was mentioned in that discussion for me, I definitely was taken aback a little bit, especially with the argument you made for Drew Doughty, despite him not having played at the time. McKenzie Weegar for what he's done this season, and even last year too. He had a 20-goal season last year. Evan Bouchard and what he's been able to do in Edmonton. There's a lot of guys out there who Canada could just plug in. It's probably likely.
Canada doesn't like risk though, and
sure.
And quite honestly, like, we have to put the World Juniors and everything aside here, because this is, when we're talking about best on men's competition, Canada has been the dominant, force in the sport for a long time. This blueprint has worked for Team Canada. I mean, the 2014 Sochi Olympics were the most dominant performance, one of the most dominant international performance in men's hockey history. Canada didn't make mistakes. And then when they did, they had Carey Price. The blueprint for Team Canada is not to win games 7-1. If you look at the Sochi tournament, they beat the U.S. in the semifinal 1-0. They beat Latvia. I think it was a 2-1 or 3-1 game in the quarters. They're meant to play near perfect hockey, and so they don't like risk takers, right? Like PK Subban was with Team Canada in Sochi. He got very limited playing time because, I mean, first of all, at that time, they didn't feel they needed him for the power play because they had other options ahead of him. But the second part was they wanted players they could trust not to make mistakes. I think Chris Tanev fits that mold because he's a veteran, because he's shown he can, diffuse top players. And I just think they could throw him into a game and not be worried he's going to make a glaring error. And that's, rightly or wrongly, we might look back on that and say, hey, that was a flawed strategy from Hockey Canada. They didn't have enough offensive pop. Like, we'll see how the tournament goes. But I think their focus, quite honestly, is on playing as close to perfect sound hockey and not make mistakes. And I think Chris Tanev, of all the players mentioned, probably fits the bill the most. Doughty would under normal circumstances. A guy who plays his first game on January 29th of the season, should we expect him to jump into a tournament on February 12th at this level of competition against players who've been playing all year, right? Like, he's jumping on the treadmill at set to 7 miles an hour or something with no warm up. And so, I'm not betting against Drew Doughty, competitive guy. He wants to be there too. Like, I don't know if you saw the interview he gave, but he is like dying to go. Like, even though he's been there and done that and has worn his sweater a lot for the country, he wants to be part of this. I think that's what Tanev gives him. It's like, it's a level of predictability that maybe some of the other, especially younger players, just might have them a little nervous about.
Okay. Utah, the Utah Hockey Club. They are
Wasatch.
Do you like the Wasatch? I thought you were a UHC guy.
No, I'm a Utah Hockey Club guy. Wasatch is the new name that's been introduced. It was not part of the original 6.
Yeah, so just to kind of set this up here, it's down to 3 different possibilities: Utah Hockey Club, Utah Mammoth, and the Utah Wasatch. Can you just explain how we got to that point, but also how did Wasatch enter the fray here?
Well, basically, Yeti was kind of the favored name. It was, I think, what the public sentiment in Utah wanted. And we got here because they couldn't secure the trademark to Yeti because of the Yeti Cooler Company. And Yeti owns the trademarks. They don't just make coolers. They sell shirts and other things that say Yeti on them. And obviously that's what the potential Utah Yeti were looking to do. And so ultimately, after discussions, at a high level with the organization, the NHL was involved at one point trying to broker some kind of deal here. And there is precedent for this. When Vegas named its team the Golden Knights, the U.S. Army has a Black Knights nickname that it uses for its teams. The parachute team associated with that is known as Golden Knights. Like, a deal had to be reached and brokered, and I don't know what that deal entailed. But the point is at this point, when you're trademarking a name, it's very likely someone else has a trademark. I think Kraken Rum had to make some deal with the Seattle Kraken for the same reasons. Anyway, the Yeti, they weren't able to broker a deal with Yeti, and so from what I understand, Wasatch is also sort of a mythical mountain creature like a Yeti. So it probably allows them to use some of the similar type of branding they wanted, but obviously with a different name. Wasatch is also, I believe, a mountain range in Utah. And so while I hadn't heard that name before, I'm guessing if you're from the area, you know it. And we'll just have to see what the people end up choosing. So, what's really unique here is that they have these names. So as you mentioned, Mammoth, Wasatch, and Hockey Club. Starting with Wednesday night's game, against Pittsburgh. They're having fans, only the fans that come to the game can come up to basically team staff on the concourse with an iPad. They get to see what the jerseys would look like with each of those names. Yeah.
Wow.
So they're not just choosing a name, they're choosing a branding strategy, and you vote on the spot. Those fans can't take a picture of those jerseys. They're not ever unveiling them publicly. And so it's only 4 home games where they're going to have their fans, and one of them happened on Wednesday, choose which not just name they like, but the branding and everything that comes with it, potential branding. So this is kind of the final phase, I think. I've already voted for Hockey Club. Told people that work for the team. They said duly noted. I don't know if my vote gets recorded officially, but it really has grown on me. Honestly, I mean, I think I liked it at the beginning, but there's something with the simplicity of it that I really like. And we'll see where it goes. They're not going to announce the team name, I should say, Julian, too, until after the season. But this is a sign they're getting much closer. They're down to 3. And there's no trademark issues with any of those 3 names. I mean, there's still things that need to be worked through, but I think it's more of a formality than the challenge that they were having with Yeti.
I still like UHC. Mammoth would be cool, but you know what? Wasatch, I don't mind it as much. I don't think it's gonna win, but
I had to go online to try to figure out how to pronounce it. I'm not sure I got it right, but the problem, I guess you get used to it, but like when I read it, I'm like, Wasatch? What is a Wasatch?
I trust you on Wasatch.
No, I mean, that's what the internet told me. The internet's never been wrong.
Yeah. They've never been wrong before. Never. Anyway, looking forward to how the results of that go down.
The Wasatch, I'll say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Give you pretty good potential for a mascot. Like you could have a badass, like mythical creature, snow creature. Like, Gritty's kind of the king of mascots right now. Yeah. Although shout out my buddy SJ Sharkey. I mean, one of the OG mascots that has stood the test of time.
Did you see the photo of SJ Sharkey with that baby?
Oh yeah. SJ is awesome. So I'm not, but Gritty's came on the scene and has really made, but I think you could make something even more badass than Gritty with a Wasatch.
I'm partial to UP myself.
There you go.
Anyway,
I mean,
Montreal Expos
there's not a right
Montreal
answer.
There's no right or wrong answer. Mascots are great. Well, you know what? I say that, and I have a cross check this week. Anyway, do you have a Brandon Saad update?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, look, he's leaving $5.4 million on the table by agreeing to mutually terminate his contract with the Blues. He was put on waivers this week, went unclaimed in large part due to the fact he has a $4.5 million cap hit through next season. He was in position where they were going to send him down to Springfield in the American Hockey League. And, he could have gone and basically kept collecting his money. And, he hasn't played in the American Hockey League since January 2013. And at that time, he only played AHL games that year because that was a 12-13 lockout. I mean, basically, Brandon Saad is a player that stepped right out of junior into the Chicago Blackhawks lineup at the time and helped them win a couple Stanley Cups. But he's betting on himself. He's a motivated guy. He's, again, left an amount of money on the table. Some agents would say, what are you doing? Yeah. And that's not a criticism to his agent. I'm sure they went through all the possibilities, right? And he made this decision. And obviously he can now go sign with another team. He can play multiple years in the league. Maybe he makes that money back, but there's a timeline in a universe here where he never makes $5.4 million as an NHL player again. But what he does allow himself to do is find another opportunity where he's going to make less money. And, we'll see what happens. He's had a very difficult season this year, but he had over 20 goals last season. And, as what happens with a lot of players, it's kind of funny. One day the guy passes through waivers unclaimed. The next day we're going, all these teams want to sign him because it's not because he's a bad player, but he had a contract that wasn't up to his abilities or his production so far this year. Now all of a sudden teams like, hey, wait, we can sign him with no acquisition cost. And it's a prorated amount for the rest of the season. I'm sure lots of contenders have been calling Lewis Gross's agent. And my understanding is it's going to end up above a league minimum deal because there is interest, because he did lose a lot of money. But I don't think it's focused on one team at this point. Like he isn't officially free to sign until Friday. That's formally when his contract will be terminated. And, good for him for betting on himself. I'm sure whoever signs him is going to get a motivated player.
Do you have a stick tap before we run out of here?
I do. And it's an easy one for me. Marc-Andre Fleury gets my stick tap. And
Love it.
I'll say this. I had a chance to speak with Mark and a few other reporters in Toronto on Wednesday. Thursday night is his final ever start at the Bell Center. what hit me though in that conversation, first of all, first class guy, obviously there's nothing that hasn't been said about Marc-Andre Fleury. The rare NHL player, I'd say, who's beloved in like multiple markets around the league, like beloved, not just liked, not just respected, beloved. But I can't think of an NHL player who went on a retirement tour where it's like everyone knew 100% he was going to retire. He announced it as his last year, and he gets all these moments along the way. And obviously we saw earlier in Pittsburgh, he had a big night. He won his last start at PPG Paints Arena. They let him cut the net out like an NBA player sometimes cuts the net, to take home as a souvenir. And he's going to get a night like that in Montreal, which is, he grew up a couple hours away from Montreal, but he was a Canadiens fan as a kid. He said he's always felt like it's been an honor to play on that ice whenever he's had a chance. And he's going to have more than 100 people in attendance, family and friends. He was saying, like aunts and cousins and people that haven't maybe in recent years come to every one of his games in Montreal. Everybody's making the effort because this is his last start there. And this is so unique. Like Mariano Rivera, if you remember his last season as a Yankee, was a kind of a farewell tour. He did something unique where he would meet with members of each organization, his last series in that city. So he had, baseball had a real chance to bid adieu to him and to celebrate his success. This is the first time I can think of it happening in the NHL. Like if you would have been a kid then, but when Wayne Gretzky retired, it was revealed with 2 games left in the season that he was done. Yeah. So his second last game was in Ottawa, and that was a chance for Canadian fans to sort of show their appreciation for him as a player. And then the last game was a Sunday afternoon game at Madison Square Garden. And that was it. And, there was no prolonged tour. I think there was maybe this idea he was coming to the end, but it wasn't public. Like in this case, Marc-Andre Fleury has said it's his last season. So anyway, I just want to salute him in general. I hope it's a great night on Thursday for his last game in Montreal. And what a unique thing to get to say goodbye in this way.
It's going to be packed. I was there when he won his 500th career game in Montreal, and fans were giving him a standing ovation with the final minute left in the game. And even after the game was over, fans were cheering him. Some of the French Canadian players on the Canadiens at the time stayed on the ice to celebrate him. It's going to be a big celebration for him when he plays against the Canadiens on Thursday.
And now you're going to cross-check someone.
I got to do it to you, man. Spartacat wearing the half and half jersey this week. For context, the Ottawa Senators announced that they're going to be playing preseason games in Quebec City next season. Michael Andlauer discussed the vision of maybe one day playing regular season games in Quebec City, which fans did not like. And then as a nod to the Quebec Nordiques, Spartacat, their mascot, wore a half Nordiques, half Senators jersey. Fans did not like that. They did not like that at all.
I don't think you should cross-check Spartacat, though. Like, he's just doing his job.
I mean, Thomas Chabot, you're basically echoing what Thomas Chabot said.
But it's the truth.
He just did what he did. You're right. All right, so I'll cross-check the Senators, not Spartacat. Spartacat's just following orders.
Man, the Senators took cross-checks all week. I saw quite a fallout in your city. But, look at
dog.
It's a PR. They stepped in it. No, I think they tried to own it too. Like they
did. They absolutely did.
They apologized for the parts of it immediately. And Cyril Leader, the team president, was out there. So, but yeah, that was maybe not a fully thought through comment or approach.
Yeah, I'll give the cross check to the Senators. Spartacat, he was just doing his job. Very fair. That's very fair. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Leave a like rating wherever you can do that, and get your questions in for the next Ask CJ for next week. CJ, great work as always, man. We'll do this again next week.
Have a good weekend, pal.
You too, sir.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.